My name is Chris Hoskins. I live in Berkeley, California. Yoga and I found each other when I was 16. I was going to school in Hayward, California, and we had fourth period electives where we could take art or jewelry making. I was in a jewelry making class and it was okay, but then I found out that there was a dance class. And there was a dance class and it was full of girls. There were no boys in the dance class. And I had grown up dancing, social dance. I really loved to dance. And that sounded a lot more fun. And when I became aware that I'd be the only boy in the class, I thought it was even more fun. As cliche as it sounds, but it was true. In class, we had a beautiful studio that had a beautiful wood floor and skylights, and the teacher would bring in Richard Hittleman records, the 33 RPM back in those days records, and she'd put them on, and we did yoga. We did yoga for long sessions of yoga. We did it for weeks on end for the whole class, and it was really quite an experience because she would turn the lights out and the lights would come through the skylight. The natural light would come through the skylight. And it was really quite beautiful. And I was very physical and very into expressing myself with my body, though I'd had no training doing so, but just from having been that way since I was a child. And the Richard Hittleman records, for anyone out there who knows, were really great in terms of how he was able to talk people through the poses, through the asana, and talk about what they were and talk about being embodied. And so I soaked it up like a sponge. And that's when I began practicing, and I really, really liked it. I really loved it. And so I would go home and practice at home too. And so I would practice a whole lot. I mean, I would go to a party on the weekend and come back at 1 in the morning and practice. I was 17 years old, 16 years old. We had parties every weekend back in those days. Everyone had a party at someone's house, and so I'd come home after a party and practice. And then a few years later, I started reading some books that had yoga philosophy in them. I hadn't been exposed to much philosophy other than what Richard Hittleman was imparting as part of teaching the practice by way of the records. And I began to read some of the philosophies, and I was like, oh. And some of the things that they describe one might experience, I was like, oh, I felt that. I did that. So it was really neat because I had an experience of the beneficial effect of the practice on the quality of my being before I knew what those effects were supposed to be. And so that's how I came to yoga. I didn't feel compelled to teach yoga for a long time. I was asked to teach periodically, but I always refused because I thought I never really knew enough to teach. And I didn't want the responsibility because I knew from having practiced for a few years that it was heavy stuff. And I knew from being in my body and working with my body that people working in their bodies was serious business. And at the same time I started practicing yoga at 16, I started also taking formal dance classes. And a few years later, in my late teens, I started performing and working with a dance company, and some of my colleagues would talk to me about yoga, and they knew I practiced yoga, and they would ask me to show them some things. But people would periodically over the years ask me what I teach, am I interested in teaching, and I always shied away from it. And then when I retired from dance in 1988, I began to be involved in the fitness business, doing one-on-one training in New York City. And I started using yoga to augment the one-on-one training I was doing. I was blessed because I was working from a different model, a very alternative model to training and fitness that was coming into awareness in the New York area at that time, that involved using other modalities and mixing modalities and different ways of working the body outside of the collegiate neuromuscular straight ahead fitness training that was often modeled around specific sport And so I began to, as part of that mindset, begin to bring yoga, teaching yoga one-on-one with my clients in a supplemental fashion to what we were doing. So that happened in the early 90s. And then some years later, I think I just thought I wanted to teach. Well, I was tired of doing fitness training. I was tired of doing training, and I wanted to still work and teach people and work with people. And it just seemed like the natural thing to go into really starting to teach yoga, because I'd been practicing for quite some time already at that point. And I had a solid practice, and I felt like I had a good understanding. And I was ready then, at that point, to take the responsibility of imparting that to others. So it was around 1999 that I started teaching group classes. And I was really scared, really nervous. I'll talk about what that means, that it's heavy stuff when people work in their bodies, and you work with people in their bodies. It's a big responsibility. Our bodies hold truth. The mind can be very deceptive. My father used to say the easiest person to lie to is yourself. And so it's really easy to abstract mentally ideas, thoughts, perceptions, experiences, recollections from the reality of what they are, what they were. And that's how the mind is. The body, however, does not allow us that margin of luxury of error or folly. And so the body really holds the reality and that reality. The body is truthful in that way. So you can, in your mind, think whatever you want to think about what you're capable of doing or who you are, which is fine, that's important. But if that's going to show up in the body in terms of an experience moving through time and space with your body in relationship to the environment around you, others around you, it will show up very soon if what's in your mind and what's in your body in that endeavor are not aligned. And so people have a lot of stuff in their bodies, hold a lot in their bodies. The body tissues, all the body systems have memories. The body holds the memory of trauma, of good times, of bad times, of abuse, of joy, from the time we were born. And so when people come to work in yoga and work with the moving of the breath and breathing and getting the cells oxygenated and the circulation going in areas that have been blocked and closed off, open up with that movement of the breath and movement of the blood and the lymph flow, when that happens, stuff gets let go. And it can be pretty scary when that happens for people who are experiencing that, if they don't have someone who is prepared to help them deal with that on the most basic levels. And this can come up in yoga. And I was aware that this could come up, and it comes up in dance. It came up in dance. And then just the simple fact that you're working with people's bodies, if you don't know what you're doing, you can hurt somebody. You can really hurt somebody bad. And so those are what I meant by the responsibility. The psycho-emotional and also physical responsibility of holding a safe space for somebody where there's going to be risk in the endeavor, but being prepared to deal with what comes up because of the risk of the endeavor. And so I take that very seriously, and I never took it lightly. And that's part of the reason why I didn't want to teach for a long time, because I didn't feel like I was prepared or wanted to deal with that. And I didn't take the prospect of that lightly. My experience when I feel when my mind and body, and also I'll say my spirit are in alignment, my experience of that is probably one of the best ways that I can illustrate it with words is that if you were to see vibrations, and if you were to experience vibrations, and there's different tonality to the vibrations and different frequencies, those frequencies begin to merge in sort of a harmonious way. Not that they all become the same in one, but they coalesce very much like African music, where there's complex rhythms, polyrhythms that overlap, and everything has a space in between the spaces in between where things occupy their appropriate space in relationship to other rhythms, other sounds being played at the moment, in a moment. And so that's what it feels like to me. It feels like there's connectivity, there's integration, there is relative ease, and that's what it feels like. And that's not even saying that it's always joyful. Generally, it's joyful, but sometimes it can bring up stuff. Like I was saying before, working with other people, it can bring up stuff. And so sometimes it can evoke crying. It can evoke sounds. And so this alignment that happens, in my experience from practicing, of the body, the mind, and the spirit, that's probably one of the ways, a couple of ways I would illustrate it. And it feels, the P word, presence, is really a good word for it. I feel really present and very aware. And like my senses are, I hear better, I see better, I smell better. My sense of taste is much more refined. I can perceive and more open and present for experiences of people and what's being said, and also, without sounding pretentious, sort of being able to read between the lines more clearly, see the spaces in between the spaces in between the spaces in between more clearly. So that's my experience of it. Good question. The space I occupy as a black man in the yoga world is unique in my perception because I've been doing this for a long time. I started doing this in 1975 when not that many people were doing yoga, generally speaking. And I was used to being the first and the only black person and black male in certain situations. And I have, from my family, a history of that. There are many people in my family who were first. And so part of being the black experience here in America, when you're pushing boundaries and going for yours, as they say, you inevitably end up in going out into the mainstream culture, the broader culture, and establishing a foothold, opening the door for the presence of people of African descent. And so my family has a history of that, and I had experience with that. And so I was really okay with and used to, for a long time, being the only black yoga teacher that I knew about, the only black male yoga teacher that I knew about. And working in being involved in the yoga community as much as I was, which for years wasn't a whole lot, but it was okay. I didn't encounter stuff. And now as yoga has become more popular, I feel it's interesting. I'm very aware of seeing what's going on with yoga and the lack of diversity in yoga. And with relative lack of diversity in yoga. And I feel like I'm watching it from the outside in, and I'm not so much a part of it because it's not new to me, which is, it's just not new to me. And but don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that I don't care, I'm not concerned with, or looking at ways that, with my presence, I might address that. And in fact, in the late 90s, I was involved with an organization called International Association of Black Yoga Teachers. And I found out, being involved with those folks, those people, that there were black yoga teachers all around the country, and there are black yoga teachers in Chicago who have been there since the 40s, black people practicing yoga in Chicago since they've been there since the 40s. And we went to Cuba, and I found out in Cuba, there's people of African descent, the Cubanos, have been practicing yoga for a long time. So it actually took me getting involved with my community around the focus of yoga to find out, wow, there's a lot more of us out there doing it. Up until that point, was I concerned about the lack of diversity in yoga? I was beginning to be, when I was beginning to be, when I got involved with the International Association of Black Yoga Teachers. So the timing for me to be involved with them was really correct in terms of my awareness. And before that, it's just not that I didn't care, it's just that I was dealing with other things and I was just used to being this person who I was. I don't see myself as exclusively black. So I didn't see myself as exclusively black in this environment. I was aware that I'm black, I'm different, I'm new here. And did I care about how other people felt about it? Hell no. I didn't care. And I don't care. Except for to deal with the fact that I'm here, we're here, and we ain't going anywhere. The practice of yoga helps me with the reality of what I'm dealing with in my immediate world, and also what I perceive in the broader world, in that it does help me see it as I think it is. It helps me accept what it is that I'm seeing, and it helps me to be resilient about how I interact with that and what I'm able to do with that, about that, and also how that impacts me in terms of my resilience to carry on. That's how it helps me. The breathing, the breath, it's a big deal. It's a very big deal, and being able to, after years, focus on the breath, the movement of the breath, the gift of life that breath is, helps me to go to a place where stuff falls away. It's not even that stuff falls away, it's that it allows me to withdraw, so to speak. Pratyahara, sense withdrawal. It doesn't mean that stuff, the sounds are not out there. It doesn't mean that the light is not out there, the voices are not out there, that the issues, the injustice is not out there. It just allows me to withdraw from it so that when I come out of that personal momentary retreat, whether it's a half hour in Shavasana, or it's a 45-minute practice, or 2 or 3 hour practice, or longer, when I come from that, then I'm able to then be more resilient. And I like to think I'm able to make better choices and accept the choices that I have to make or things that I have to do that I really just don't want to have to be bothered with dealing with. So that's how it helps me. And I think that's really, it's easy to feel good when you feel good. It's easy to feel nice when everything is nice, okay? But when stuff is hitting the fan, and stuff is hitting the fan all around you, and right now a lot of stuff is hitting the fan all around the planet. And for me, some stuff is hitting the fan close to home. So it's really easy to, when that's not occurring, to feel groovy and to be like happy, or feel pleasant. But the real test, like MLK says, the test of character is not how someone conducts himself when everything is going fine. That doesn't define character. The test of integrity and character is how one conducts himself when stuff's hitting the fan. And there's a lot of wonderful quotes about that. That are extensions of that, or that illustrate that in different ways. But basically, yoga helps me to manage that better. And so when everything is groovy, which maybe one day it'll be again, at least in my life, I'm going to feel even groovier. But it does help me feel resilient. So resiliency, the R word, is really, really important because that really kind of sums it up. Buoyancy and resiliency. So asana and the kind of pranayama I practice, which is just breath observation, not specific defined breath movement patterns, but breath observation, and restoratives really, really are huge in my life in terms of keeping me sane, keeping me on track, keeping me resilient and buoyant. and hopefully being able to share those qualities when I can with those around me, in the world around me, but also share those teachings so that those teachings can do for the folks around me and about what those things do for me. I think that's why most people who start teaching yoga, because they're like, wow, this is great. This feels good. I want to share this. I want to show other people about this. What I would offer as advice to yogis, whoever they may be, practice, practice, practice. If you teach, practice. If you teach what you practice, practice what you teach. If you're new to yoga, practice. I would advise you, in this climate where there are so many people teaching, I think that it's important for people who are coming to yoga to challenge their teachers. Okay? Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask. Make them do their jobs. Okay? You want to be with someone who can, as much as possible, address who you are and is willing to address who you are, who will work with you as you arrive coming to them. And if they're not able to, ask them to send you to someone who will. But life is precious. Time is precious. So the time you spend with your teacher, I'd encourage those who are new to yoga to go learn. My advice is to not think that yoga is just asana or just stretching. It's about relationship. It's about connectivity. It's about being involved intimately with yourself and intimately with those around you, and more broadly, intimately with the world and the environment and the universe. So we all have responsibility, and so I would advise those people who are new to yoga to be responsible students and make your teachers be responsible teachers. And don't take it lightly. As accessible as it is, and as sometimes it's marketed as this fun, joyous thing, you want to get to the, shall I say, the meat of the matter, the heart of the matter for you. So ask, investigate, practice, watch, look, learn. I mean, I'll say I want to give thanks to my teachers, and I want to give thanks to those people whose shoulders I stand on. My ancestors, my mother, my father, my grandparents, and generations going back, who are really the reason that I'm here, at least in body. And also, I have thanks to give to them for the qualities of spirit and sensibilities that come down through cellularly through the generations. And those are the folks that I want to thank, specifically and generally.